Welcome back to the Wolf Property and Casualty. I'm your host, Derek Lasniak, with over 15 years of commercial broking experience, focused on the middle market, upper middle market, national account space. The Wolf of Property and Casualty is a practitioner-led podcast built for brokers, buyers, and insurance carriers. No bullshit, each and every time, each and every episode. Revisiting our series called Claiming the News. And I've been following along a lot on this topic, and there is a pun that is intended when I say following along, because I want to talk about the insurance implications of the Meta litigation. And Meta obviously owns Facebook, owns Instagram, and I, like many people, are guilty of wasting too much of my time, energy, probably my soul, looking through those two platforms. 20 different states' attorney generals have banded together and have now sued Facebook, Meta, for $1.4 trillion. And for those keeping track at home, with Facebook's big push in CapEx spending, and their market cap is around $1.5 trillion. Somebody that I follow a lot named Brandon Shu, who runs a podcast called Risk Seller, who talks a lot about the insurance news. I'm going to steal one of his terms, and I think it's very relevant. Technology and social media is having their kind of big tobacco moment here. The dollars are not drops in a bucket. If you look up Facebook litigation, you will see big numbers, things that starts with B's all over that have been swept under the rug that they pay. But this is coming at a time when people are paying attention to how specifically younger people are interacting with things like the internet. AI is causing people to rethink our relationship with some of the social media platforms in general. Has it gone too far? And frankly, every technology and company, including Meta, are starting to spend far more than their revenue can keep up with. You have technology companies issuing huge bonds for the first time to fund the data center build out, and that's including Meta. So if this was a $3 billion shakedown, this might go away really quickly and it might not matter because that's pocket change. But when you talk about $1 trillion demand, which, by the way, I don't think will ever get paid and never be that amount, for a company that's worth $1.5 trillion and worse yet, doesn't have much free cash flow as it invests in CapEx, it's concerning. But I'm not here to layer onto things like that. I'm here to talk about the insurance implications. Meta still buys insurance. The cost-benefit analysis of putting up some kind of funding in the traditional market far outweighs mere self-insurance. And if we go back to when this saga started, Meta is incorporated in Delaware. Back in February, when some of these suits were filed, all of the insurance carriers, including names like Chubb, Travelers, etc., 20 different insurance carriers banded together, went before a court in Delaware and said, we don't have a duty to defend. Now, let's remember, policies need a couple things in order for them to respond. There's really two parts. The first is policies are written on a duty to defend basis, meaning the policy says that the insurance carrier has a duty and a right to defend the insured in the event that there's an allegation that triggers coverage. So before this case came to where it is going to be tried this week or next week, all the insurance carriers must have issued a denial to Meta. Imagine the adjuster writing, "Thanks for all the premium, Meta, no coverage," and said, "We don't feel like we have a duty to defend the allegations." Now, I don't have a copy of the allegations. I'm sure they're available. But to summarize, the stance that the insurance carriers took on why they don't want to provide any defense coverage, defense is only the duty to defend, is because the allegations from the state's attorney general says that the platform, the product of Meta, not the content, the product, meaning the platform. Content is, of course, provided by individual users. I'll talk about that at the end. But the platform itself, there was intentional design decisions made that targeted young people, targeted addictive behavior, and targeted the not well-being of the users of the platform. What's important in the way that those claims were characterized, and this is a lesson, I've said this on other Claiming the News podcasts, it doesn't matter how strong your coverage is. This isn't a failure of Meta's broker. You don't get to design how an allegation is made, and you need a coverage decision for your insurance policies when an allegation is served, not when it's hashed out in court, not when a decision for what the penalty is. Defense costs are millions of dollars, and in this case, who knows how much. But the trigger what is going to be used as the basis for a coverage determination isn't what actually happened. It's what the angry plaintiff attorney, or in this case, the attorney generals, allege. They're not thinking about Meta's insurance policies and all the additional funding that they might be able to get out of a settlement if they trigger them. They're thinking about using lightning rod in the news types words. So yes, they wrote their demand to say a bunch of Meta engineers sat around and said, how do I get a 12-year-old hooked on this product and destroy his self-confidence and well-being? That's what they're alleging. They're alleging that deliberate decisions, intentional decisions were made by Meta to make the most addicting product in the world that would cause harm to younger people and to all of its users. That's completely different than saying Meta didn't do a good job of filtering people who were putting out dangerous content. They're saying, look, they created the algorithm, the unlimited scroll, for example. They made decisions in their design that were going to get more eyeballs on it for longer, that was going to help them boost their revenue. So what the insurance carriers in a frankly an insurance carrier favorable court in Delaware, sorry Meta, you incorporated in Delaware for your own tax reasons, and the insurance carriers are going to use that state of incorporation against you because Delaware does have a long history of siding on the side of carriers. But anyway, they said, look, the allegations, whether or not they're true, it's got nothing to do with me, the insurance carrier. They're saying that these were deliberate and intentional acts. Deliberate and intentional acts are going to be excluded under every liability policy, whether it's a tech E&O, a media liability, a commercial general liability. So they issued back in spring of 2026, there is no duty to defend. That doesn't necessarily mean there won't be a settlement that takes place, but it does mean that Facebook, Meta, is on the hook to fund their own defense for the time being. Now, to separate that, let's say that we get 2 weeks down the line, they're going to separate the settlement. Let's say the settlement's $500 billion. And let's say $100 billion of that is for negligence, unintentional negligence of Meta and their design decisions that resulted in the non-well-being of its users. Then the settlement coverage would kick in. Duty to defend and settlement provisions and do they trigger coverage are different. So you can lose a duty to defend battle in court and have to fund your own defense. And then you can have a settlement that does trigger the policy and the policy can kick back in. And it potentially could kick back in and reimburse for some of the defense costs. But as it stands right now, because the plaintiffs, in this case, the attorney generals, focused on intentional design decisions, they have rendered a lot of Facebook's policies. I don't have access to them, but a lot of their presumably tech E&O, media liability, commercial general liability policies, that even if there is damage or mental anguish, aka bodily injury, that would trigger a CGL, for example, that's not going to be available to them until settlement, because the allegations in the suit are saying that there's intentional acts, which are always going to be excluded. I think this is really interesting. This could be a bellwether moment for the world we live in and the products that come out, specifically in the internet age and the AI age, where you design things. You design video games to be addicting. You design social media platforms to be addicting. In a race for more eyeballs and therefore design energy going into sustained longer eyeballs, what comes out of this very high profile case will probably have an impact on insurance law moving forward. And in Meta's defense, I will say they likely spend millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars on self-insurance through probably a number of captives and offshore solutions, self-insurance. And my guess is they spend millions of dollars on traditional insurance as part of an overall build as big of a tower as they possibly can to insure these types of things. If I was their broker, I would be looking back at these insurance companies and saying, okay, well, let's take a look at the tech E&O policy, the commercial general liability policy. Let's see, you rated my liability exposure on $1.5 trillion in revenue. I've been paying premiums on $1.5 trillion in revenue. What exactly am I paying for? You've essentially said, after an allegation that my product caused harm, and I'm telling you that I didn't intentionally do it, but I'm also making something for the very first time. You're essentially saying no coverage at the very first challenge of my product causing bodily injury. So in the absence of you defending me in this case, what the hell am I getting for my coverage? Why should I spend my $20 million with you 20 insurance carriers to put up this tower when the one thing, my product, is not covered at all? And I think there's an argument to that as well. That's what I'd be saying if they're brokered. Obviously, not all of us write Meta. Obviously, not all of us write the next big social media platform. But what I'll end with is this. The lessons you can learn are very much like a lot of other claiming the news. What's in the allegation doesn't have to be true in order for it to limit coverage. And if you don't have the bankroll that Meta does to fund defense, and now you lost a duty to defend argument, what now? Do you have the ability to defend yourself out of pocket when you don't know what the settlement will look like? It's a lesson that I continue to learn every time I read cases, and ones that you should absolutely think about when talking to your customers, or for you buyers out there when thinking about how these suits come to fruition.